everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for the University of Regina's 2023 Alumni Effect Virtual Speaker Series. I'm Lorena Haber, and I'm an Associate Dean and a Professor in the Faculty of Kinesiology and Health Studies. And over the next hour, we're going to hear from Haus, a proud alumni of the University of Regina. And I also just want to give a shout out as well, too, because she was our recent KHS Distinguished Recent Alumni Award recipient for 2023. So this is really exciting to see this being showcased at a broader level. So before I introduce Kara, I'd like to acknowledge that the University of Regina and its federated colleges are on Treaty 4 and Treaty 6 territories, the homelands of the Nehiyawak, Anishinaabeg, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and Michif Métis nations. The University of Regina's Alumni Engagement Department is pleased to offer the Alumni Effect Speaker Series virtually. This is my first time hosting this series, and so I hope that your time with us today inspires you to return for future sessions when we resume later on this year. I'd also like to point out, in case you didn't notice, that these sessions are being recorded and they're going to be posted on the U of R alumni website, so you can watch the presentations again or share them with your friends and family. You'll also see a link to the alumni website in the chat if you'd like to access the video later, so that'll be posted in there. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce our first Alumni Effect speaker of 2023, Dr. Haus. We're glad you're joining us today. So I'm going to give a little bit of an overview and then you can add something. So Kara is an alumna of the University of Regina who earned her Bachelor of Kinesiology with great distinction from U of R in 2016. She then made her way to Toronto and graduated from the Canadian Memorial Chiropractic College as a Doctor of Chiropractic. Kara is in the process of launching an education-based initiative to present information on how to make every workplace, healthcare facility, educational institution comfortable in welcoming and affirming queer patients, clients, and staff members. Her mission is to make queer health and language fun to learn and easy to implement in workplaces across the country. Today, we're going to hear from Kara, who's going to discuss her experience as an advocate for queer healthcare in the chiropractic field and the initiatives that benefit transgender and gender diverse people in healthcare, as well as other workplace situations. So I'll turn it over to Kara to add a little bit more to your introduction.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Dr. Haber. I'm so happy to be here. So as Dr. Haber said, I graduated from the U of R back in 2016 with a kinesiology degree. And then I made the move to the city of Cement in Toronto and graduated in June of 2020, kind of like this over Zoom, very similar to this, from CMCC with my chiropractic degree. After some of the COVID dust kind of settled, I actually joined the chiropractic office that I grew up visiting as a patient in my hometown of Lumsden, just outside Regina. Pattison Health is our clinic name, and I've been fortunate to grow my practice here for these last 3 years. During my time at CMCC, I was fortunate to have the opportunity to help in creating an LGBTQ club at the school, and I served as president of the club during my intern year. We were committed to sort of introducing queer health education practices to interns and to the clinicians, chiropractors that worked at CMCC, just to make clinics that were affiliated with CMCC a little bit more queer friendly and welcoming, especially in a center like Toronto, where you do have, quite a large queer population. In 2022, I was invited to speak on a panel for women in chiropractic in Montreal at the National Chiropractic Convention, which is held every 2 years by our national association. And as Dr. Haber mentioned, right now I'm in the process of sort of building a lecture series to present in small businesses, both locally and hopefully a little bit more broadly, to help educate workplaces regarding, queer staff, queer clientele, queer patients, and how to sort of navigate things like language, pronouns, name changes, those types of things, and just make it a little bit more comfortable for sort of everyone involved that way.
Great, thanks, Kara. I realize I also went off script a little bit, so I have to go back and just explain what we're going to do today. So it is a question and answer. So I have some questions for Kara, and she'll respond. Then we have about 15 minutes, hopefully at the end, for if other people have questions for Kara. If you do, you can put them in the chat that's at the bottom of the Zoom screen, and I'll share them with Kara as we sort of end up at that point. And hopefully we can get through as many questions as we can in the time allotted. We want to make sure that we get this done as well too by 1 o'clock. All right, so sorry, that was my, I forgot to mention that before we get going. So we're going to get started with some of the questions that we have for Kara. So the first question that might be of interest to students and recent grads are, what inspired you to become an advocate for queer healthcare, specifically in chiropractic health?
Yeah, so I guess there's a few answers to that question, sort of first on a personal level, and then on the level of as a student, and then sort of on a professional level as well. So I'll kind of answer that way. So I came out as queer in 2007. And although that seems recent to some of us, we actually lived in a very different world in 2007 with respect to queer issues and that kind of thing. So, so I'll just give a couple of personal examples. So the first time I asked my doctor's office to change my next of kin to my wife, well, she's my wife now, but my girlfriend at the time, it was met with some pretty brutal homophobia. And at the time, that was just sort of, that was what you thought was normal as a queer person. It was like, okay, this is the price I guess we pay for being out, right? And it's terrible to think about it that way now, but that's really how it was then. And outside of healthcare, it wasn't much different. I do remember trying to rent a car once. We were in BC on a vacation, and we were trying to rent a car. My wife grew up a little more old school than I did, so she didn't have a credit card at the time. So I'd use my credit card. And the credit card had to match the driver's license. The name on the credit card had to match the name on the driver's license. So I had just had a little hand surgery. And so the medication that I was taking, I didn't feel like I was, all that in shape to be driving around Vancouver. So it wasn't really going to be a good idea for me to drive. And so the employee of the rental company said, no one else can drive that car except a spouse. And I said, oh, okay, perfect. Like, she's my spouse. And it was met with some real nasty looks and about a 10-minute back and forth. Did you just make that up? You can't just lie about that. You're going to have to prove that, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't know exactly how she wanted us to prove it, and I'm not going to speculate. But eventually she did finally allow us to take the car. So as a student, those instances kind of stayed with me. And I just remember thinking, we have continuing education sessions for Indigenous awareness, and we have continuing education sessions for reducing sexual harassment in the workplace, for anti-racism campaigns, et cetera, et cetera. But no one really focuses on things like queer education and queer health issues, right? So things like pronouns and names and language, and queer people kind of get lumped in with this idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion, but it sort of seems sometimes that we have so many workplaces that want to foster those traits, but very little for education in how to properly do it. And so, as far as, specifically in chiropractic, I think two things I love just sort of naturally melded together. I didn't set out to advocate for queer people in chiropractic, but I remember a scene at CMCC actually where there were 3 clinicians, so 3 experienced chiropractors standing in a hallway at one point, and I kind of walked up and was like, what's going on? Well, we have a trans patient in the office, and we aren't sure how to change the intake forms, what to do with the intake forms to accommodate this patient. And at that point, it kind of dawned on me, I kind of realized, we have a huge gap here. We have a huge gap in education in healthcare, and gaps in education in healthcare lead to dangerous situations for patients, right? But gaps also lead to opportunities. They beget opportunities. And so I think that's sort of where I am now. Is I just have this opportunity, and I'm just trying to seize it, I suppose.
Great, thanks, Kara. I really appreciate you sharing personal experiences and personal stories, which may be something that other people, a cisgender person like myself, would take for granted, not understand, and not recognize. So again, I appreciate you sharing those things, and also realizing as well too that some of these educational pieces maybe we don't send out to be an advocate, but sometimes there's simple things like you're talking about a form that can be changed that makes a huge difference. But sometimes that's a hurdle. That's a hurdle in trying to change some of these things, is something very simple like language and pronouns. So I appreciate hearing some of those things, which leads into the next part of the question, which are, can you share some of the challenges that you faced when in trying to do this and trying to create inclusivity in healthcare?
Yeah, for sure. So this is actually a very timely question because we're actually dealing with this right now in chiropractic. So one of our biggest challenges is just providers believing that they don't need to change anything with respect to inclusivity, right? So particularly in healthcare, we talk about our oath, right? So treat everyone the same, regardless of color, creed, age, sex, orientation. And the simplicity of that is great. But that's not really what we do, right? So everyone has the right to care regardless of those things, absolutely. But care is obviously different depending on some of those characteristics. So for example, we don't treat an infant with the same mindsets that we treat a 30-year-old athlete. We don't ask the same history questions. We don't do the same treatments. And the same is true in the queer population, right? We have a real challenge with some of our members right now, sort of innocently thinking, like, if I just treat everybody the same, it won't be an issue if they're queer, if they're trans, or what have you. And in reality, there are different considerations in some cases. For example, trans people who haven't had certain organs removed are at risk for cancers that affect those organs. And for trans people who passed really well, sometimes we don't consider, a 50-year-old woman who has constant back pain might be coming in with a prostate cancer that has spread to the spine. And, so if we don't ask those questions and we don't change sort of our perspective and change our thinking, to open up that conversation and we just think about it as a social thing, so sometimes providers forget that inclusion and equity are more than just words on an Instagram post to make your clinic look good. Many times it's also about ensuring that, we're meticulously educated about who we're caring for, and that our openness to continue to learn could literally be life-saving for some patients. And I think that's probably the biggest challenge, the biggest hurdle, is to have our members and have just providers in general understand that, it's not just about, putting a rainbow on your logo. It's more about making sure that we understand sort of what we're dealing with when people walk through the door that might not look like ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, sort of speaking to those ideas that it's important to value it, but it's also important to put that into practice. That practice can be in many different things, again, as well as asking the right questions or understanding what this might look like in different scenarios and being aware that those could be. So again, thank you for sharing that. So the next question is, who were your mentors and what lessons did you learn from them as you navigated your way through those challenges and move forward in your career and toward your goals?
Yeah, so definitely my educators. Like I spent a lot of time in school. So I've spent a lot of time with
Good
educators.
plug for school.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. School is cool. I think, and I kind of mentioned it before everyone kind of jumped on, Dr. Roz Kelsey at the U of R certainly lit a fire in me with respect to how to sort of effectively facilitate change, right? In social justice, how to think critically about the issues that marginalized groups face, both in sport and in healthcare. So she was really, like what a inspiration as far as that went. She really challenged me because I kind of came from a small town, Saskatchewan. My parents are conservative, very conservative, very old school thinking, that kind of thing. And she kind of just challenged me to be like, like, you should think about, you should look at the world the way sometimes other people look at the world. And then I think, Dr. Isla Azad, she's the CEO of the Canadian Chiropractic Association. And she used to teach at CMCC, and she's just a very, she's a lady of color. She approaches they kind of issues with sort of the same mindset that I do, right? Because she's coming at it as a brown lady, and they face similar, similar obstacles and similar adversity and that kind of thing. And Dr. Crystal Draper, who also works for the CCA. She's the senior manager of professional practice. They just play a huge role in providing me a platform to use my voice to continue to push for, more queer health education and inclusion in chiropractic across Canada. Their initiatives with respect to diversity and inclusion come with considerable pushback at times, and they continue forward. So that's obviously pretty inspiring, just to see that. And then I would be remiss if I didn't call out Dr. Doug Pattison, who's the owner of our clinic here. He took a chance on me when I came to his small town Saskatchewan practice and said, "Hey, I want to start a practice that is open and welcoming to queer people." As a small town conservative sort of gun-toting, guy, he kind of said, "You know what? If you want to try to make the rocket go, you make the rocket go." And we certainly learn from each other every day, because we do come at life from very different directions. But without the support of him and his willingness to be open and willing to help me, I certainly wouldn't be where I am. So I think that's, he's a pretty big mentor in my life for sure. So
it's nice to know that there's sort of a range of people who can be mentors or have been mentors to you, or allies as well too.
yes,
and then recognizing that this is part of the cycle, that then you can also become a mentor to other people and keep pushing this forward. So it's nice to give those props, but also to be part of this process. The last question that we have for you is, what advice would you have for a student or an alum that is interested in implementing an inclusive advocacy approach in their workplace?
Yes, advice. I'm not going to tell you to run, I promise. I have to say, remember that the first one through the wall will always get bloody. You're going to, there's going to be people from the top to the bottom that are going to push back at you, because we all undoubtedly think that we know better, right? No matter sort of where we are on our learning journey, we all sort of think that, we know better and we know something about everything. But I would say probably the most important thing is enlist the help of people who have lived experience in these types of oppression and marginalization. It's one thing, to hang a cute rainbow sign or plaster positivity with respect to, people of color and anti-racism and those types of things all over the office. But it's really quite another thing to actually address real issues in advocacy and ensure that marginalized staff or clientele see that policy and change and understand that we're aware of current issues sort of facing their communities and that we're willing to stand with them through those difficult times. Advocacy and allyship comes with discomfort, and that's sort of the point, right? Like, so, right now, the current climate, there's a lot of transphobia out there. There's a lot of, there's a lot of need to protect trans kids and protect queer kids and all that kind of stuff. And it comes with discomfort. It absolutely does. We're seeing it with things like Target and all these corporations that, they're trying, but it seems sometimes when it gets really hard, it's like, okay, we got to pull back now. And, so I would say certainly enlist the help of people that have lived through those experiences, because they're the ones that are really going to be able to come at it from sort of deep in the hole of in the hole of oppression, and that's going to be really helpful for your business or your career path, and being able to sort of implement inclusive advocacy and make your workplace just a very comforting and much better space for queer people and people of marginalized groups kind of all over, right? So that's what that would be my advice, I suppose. In a convoluted type of way.
No, but I think it's recognizing that it's not easy.
No, it's not.
That it's not easy. And again, I loved your statement about the first one through that brick wall. It gets bloody, and that it is hard, but someone has to do it, and things won't change until we actually do those things. But I think also it's important. I think something that I learned or I recognized from you as well too is that some of these things don't have to be big changes. We don't have to take on everything. And part of it is that building up of small things about awareness and education, and it'll grow and continue to grow. So again, that important part about how important language is. Sometimes it's such a simple thing. It can be such a simple thing, but changing people's language, like I'll say even for myself, I don't say, hey guys anymore. That's taken me a long time to stop saying. It's such a simple thing, but trying to be more inclusive, to say hello everyone, or do things like that. So the language is, you got to train yourself, and you got to be reminded.
Well, and the other thing too, like, you don't know what you don't know, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, if there are, you know, new changes to language and new changes to those types of things, it's difficult because you just don't know what you don't know.
True.
And it's just willing to be
Yeah. And it's ongoing. I think that's
absolutely. Oh yeah. And there's nothing more quickly evolving than this, right? So, yeah, certainly. Even for me, like, there's times where I'll be speaking and they're like, actually, you're not supposed to say that anymore. And I'm like, oh, okay.
But be okay with that. I think that's part of it, is be okay with certainly. That. And sometimes realize, yeah, maybe that's a language that was okay 5 years ago, isn't okay now. Be okay, right. Accept that wisdom and move forward with that, of understanding, okay, mental note, I'll try and be better in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Kara, for this time that we've spent with in learning a little bit more about you and the work that you're doing. If anyone has questions, actually, we do have one question. And again, if people have other questions, you can type it into the chat. So there's a question from Mark. Are there healthcare organizations that you see doing really well in their evolution or growth?
Oh, goodness. Good question. Well, I mean, the CCA, the Canadian Chiropractic Association, has actually, their initiatives, they've really honed in on inclusion, diversity, and equity. As far as healthcare organizations, you know, unfortunately, in our neck of the woods here on our side of the country, it's slower. It's certainly slow, unless you get into BC. But, you know, there's places in Ontario where, you know, you're looking at, you know, queer exclusive places, you know, queer exclusive healthcare organizations that that cater to the queer community, almost exclusively. So I would say it's coming. I would say we are certainly not there. But, you know, I'm hoping that things like this, right, we gain momentum, and it starts with one healthcare facility that, you know, can advertise, you know, we know the language, we know we have the education, and we know sort of what we're doing as far as the queer population, and it starts to build after that, because, like, you look at Generation Z coming up, right? There's a big queer population that's up and coming, and so these people are going to be our consumers very quickly. And if businesses and organizations and service providers don't start to evolve with the generational change, they're going to be left behind, unfortunately. So yeah, I think it's coming in the next, you know, 10 or 15 years, but it's certainly not where we would like it to be.
So there's some examples. So we see some examples in BC, maybe some other places that we can look towards as some good examples. Yeah.
So the last half of my internship in Toronto was actually at a place called Sherborne Health, and it caters almost exclusively. Well, I shouldn't say that. It caters exclusively to marginalized populations. So, you know, the indigent population, queer people, trans health, all those kind of things. People with HIV/AIDS, which obviously is a consideration for the queer population as well. So yeah, so it's certainly there. It's certainly, you know, on its way in, type of thing. But I think, you know, in Saskatchewan, we seem to bring up the rear sometimes, and so which is okay. But yeah, so I'm hoping that it's gonna make its way across the country here fairly soon.
Well, I think you're an example of where we're not bringing up the rear.
Yeah, fair enough.
You can do it in some spots and move forward with this. All right, we have another question from Carla. Are issues that affect queer patients taught in medical school? And if not, how does this affect the ability to treat patients who are queer?
Oh, such a good question. So I'm thinking that that's starting to change, certainly. However, it is frustrating how little you will see GPs, like general practitioners and MDs and surgeons, etc. It's frustrating how little you'll see them actually try to do the continuing education and those types of things. And that's kind of what I was talking about before when I was saying, sometimes our providers, they think that if I just treat everyone the same, right? And in medical school, it's kind of the same thing. And I think it's obviously gotten better because we are seeing a lot more, like there's a lot more gender affirming healthcare, all those types of things. So you certainly do have to have some type of education with respect to that. So I think that's starting to get the ball rolling with respect to that. But things like issues with HIV/AIDS, all of those sorts of areas still come with a great amount of stigma. And so, because even we see, HIV/AIDS is still almost a criminal offense to have HIV, right? So if you have been intimate with somebody knowing that you have HIV, we still don't see a lot of education in medicine regarding undetectable equals untransmittable. So the idea of, if you're medicated, if you're taking your medications and your viral load is 0 and you're undetectable, you are not going to transmit the virus. The amount of healthcare providers that don't know that is astronomical, and that's a very simple, that's day one. That's like healthcare 101. And so it affects the ability to treat patients, and to be completely honest, it affects patients willingness to seek out healthcare providers, right? So there are a ton of patients in my practice who don't see their medical doctors. They come and see me, and I, as much as I can, get them to where they need to be, but they don't want to go to their medical doctors because they're right marginalized, and they run into things that are terrible with their medical doctors. And so it's just, it's become difficult. So
which leads into that question about, do you have any tips about finding someone who's inclusive?
So Out Saskatoon is a website that you can visit, and providers have to apply to be a member of Out Saskatoon, and it has actually queer friendly or like queer owned businesses in everything you can think of. So medicine, chiropractic, physiotherapy, like law, like if you want a lawyer that, happens to be queer, electricians, like the amount of friends that I have there Out Saskatoon that are just random everyday people, but they're like, hey, like I'm a queer real estate agent, if you want a queer real estate agent, because there are so many situations where queer people, solicit the help of somebody and they are not a queer friendly sort of provider or a queer friendly service or what have you. So Out Saskatoon, I would certainly check into, because it's called Out Saskatoon, but it's actually Saskatchewan wide. So yeah,
that's great. Oh yeah, and the link was just put up there for that. That's excellent.
Perfect.
So another question from Heather: how do you approach reaching out to people with lived experience while avoiding tokenism?
Oh, you kind of don't. So here's the thing. So for myself personally, I am open to answering any types of questions related to queer health, related to my own personal path, et cetera, et cetera. Not all queer people are like that, right? So you will have to sort of find a way to seek out advocates and people with lived experience that are willing to share that. And it can be a little bit difficult sometimes, but for the most part, if somebody is willing to sort of do things like I do, we put ourselves out there. We certainly want to put ourselves out there and say, hey, come and consume my content. and avoiding tokenism, yeah, I suppose, like, tokenism is an issue. I think when you're talking about the education of some of these things, most people that, most queer people or people of color or, anything like that, people with disabilities, if they're willing to sort of speak on the behalf of, the rest of their group, and we don't really love to do that, but if they're willing to speak on their own lived experience, they're likely to tell you. And then if they're not, they're also likely to tell you. So there are, lots of queer people who I don't want to talk about that. I don't, don't ask me, do your own research, et cetera, et cetera. And then there are queer people like me who are like, yes, come and let's chat about it. Let's learn about it. Let's do all the things we can to get more and more people more comfortable with it and more willing to learn and willing to change and all those kind of things. So I think that if you're looking for it, you're going to find it, and you're going to find it in people that want to share with you and want to share, their experience and that kind of thing.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I was going to add that I think some of that is just asking, and you'll find out, you'll be directed. But part of that is if you don't ask, then you won't know.
No, absolutely. And don't be scared to get, like, the worst that's going to happen is they're going to say,
no,
go away, and say, okay, sorry about that. And that's the thing, is don't be afraid to ask, ask questions and that kind of thing. Now, don't go crazy, and you can't be asking people personal questions and that kind of thing, but certainly, for the most part, if you're actively looking for it and you're in the right space, you're going to find it without making anybody upset and that kind of thing.
So we have another question that's about, are you seeing any active recruitment for a diversity of teachers?
For diversity of teachers, like, do you mean like high school, elementary school teachers type of thing?
Question.
I don't.
Teachers in healthcare.
Okay. No, no, I don't. I am part of a couple of groups, but they're like North America wide, where I don't know if anybody follows him, but he's a textbook artist, and his art is people of color in anatomy and healthcare textbooks, right? Because things look different, rashes and different markings and all of those things look different on Black skin and brown skin and all of those types of things. So there are certainly initiatives out there. Are there initiatives out there close to home here? I don't think so much, not so much. And part of that is because we have, a very high white population, and we have a very high cis and heterosexual population. And so, when it's such a sort of a condensed ilk, it's difficult to recruit those types of, it's difficult to find those types of patients, first of all, and it's difficult to recruit those types of teachers because they're even more, it's even a smaller sort of pot. So no, I don't see a whole lot of active recruitment for diversity of teachers. What I do see sort of across the country is active, I would say trying, like there's a lot of, specifically corporations and that kind of thing. They are trying, and you can see that they're trying. A little bit of education here and there wouldn't probably hurt them, because like I was talking about, you see things like, rainbow logos, and you see things like, let's fight racism and those kind of sort of taglines. But a lot of times what you don't see is sort of the policy and change. So yeah, I would say I'm hoping for more recruitment of diversity in teachers, but at this point, it's there's certainly a scarcity of that.
So you've got time. If anyone has any last questions for Kara, you can put it in the chat. Not. I might ask one quick question. So if
Certainly.
you were coming into my first year class, it's a first year sociology of sport class, so a little bit beyond sort of the healthcare, but to give students, first year students, a little bit of advice, perhaps and again, recognizing, yes, they're Gen Z, so they're a little bit different.
Yeah,
But
they
what
know
kind of
that.
advice would you give to them about being more inclusive to a queer population, whether it's in sport, recreation, health? Simple little things for
Yes.
first year students.
Yes, first year students. I remember being a first year, but I was like a 26-year-old first year student, so I don't think that counts.
It does.
So I would say, and Gen Z will tell you this, stop using gendered language would be my first one, would be to stop using gendered language. Because that goes a super long way. It goes a very long way. Because that's what we do. We use gendered language. We use gendered language all the time. We say actor and actress. We say, you know what I mean? So that would be my number one. My number one thing would be, if you're going to start a business or if you're going to work for a service, stop using gendered language. And the language piece is one of my it's the thing I'm most interested in, because the language makes such a huge difference. You can absolutely blind somebody's day with poor language about their identity or their pronouns or whatever else there is. And so I would say, to a first year class, I would say, do some research, do some education in queer language. That would be my biggest one.
Thanks, Carrie. I just wrote that down. I'm going to say that in my lecture in the fall.
Okay.
And give them maybe a task of looking for gendered language and how they might change that. So I appreciate it.
Yeah.
It's not that I'm not aware of it, but I like how simple you made that.
Yeah, and it really is. It's about the language. If you're a queer patient walking into a doctor's office and the first question on their intake form is there a name you'd rather go by, or something like that, like, you have that person right now, and you probably have another 100 queer people outside waiting to come in once that person gets out there, because we're loud and we say stuff. So, and yeah, like that's a big one. It's the term "stay woke." Woke has become this sort of dog whistle for both sides of the political spectrum. The term "stay woke" actually started in the 1920s, and it was for racism, right? It was stay woke in the city, like Black people would say to each other, "Stay woke," like, stay woke, don't go there, stay woke, don't go here. And that's true to this day. Like, queer people know where the queer friendly places are, and so yeah, so that's what I would say. Just make sure that your language is on point, because that's going to get you that's going to get you to high places.
So we've got one last question, and then we'll wrap it up after this. And that is a comment from Carla. What you do is challenging. How do you stay positive?
Well, so this is actually, that's actually funny that you asked that, because I was thinking about this a couple days ago. So for a very long time, I'd say until I was probably 32 or 33, so a few years ago, I wasn't. And I would fight on Facebook, and I would be mad, and I would, well, if I can change one person's mind, then the thousands that are horrible, it'll be worth it. And that's not really true. It's more like, what's the best way that I can make a difference to people without being abrasive. And I think that being abrasive and just being angry that the world isn't exactly what it should be for me, that's true for most people. That's true for people of color, and that's true for people who have disabilities, and that's true for queer people, and that's true for women in a lot of respects, and that's true for so many people. And I think that when you it is challenging, and it's hurtful. There's definitely a lot of times where it's very hurtful, and it often comes from people that you think you think that it shouldn't come from. It comes from people from professional places. And I guess, how do I stay positive? I don't know. I think in the last few years, I've really realized my own identity. And you see, you know what? I look up to Generation Z because they don't really care. Like and I think Generation Alpha, which is like my niece, she's 5, she's Generation Alpha. She's 5 and she takes no crap. And so I kind of look up to those generations where they're like, you know what, like eventually we're going to take over and y'all are going to have to just catch up. And so I'm excited for the future because yeah, Generation Z, they're not taking crap. And so that's how I stay positive is, you know, when you talk to, you know, my 18-year-old cousin who I'm saying, you know, all these words about pronouns and they, them and all that kind of stuff. And he's explaining it to his Generation X parents. And they're like, how do you know all this stuff? And he's like, how do you not know all this stuff? Right? Like, that's awesome. That's wonderful. He's 18 or not even 18. And he's just like educating all of these boomers and Generation X. And I'm like, perfect. My work here is done. So yeah, there's a lot of positive things that come out of it, you know, and the negative stuff, yeah, that just means we still need pride, right? So
right.
So
well, I'm cognizant of the time that we have and of everyone's valuable time. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us today and contributing to this conversation. It was a wonderful, engaging, informative conversation. And again, most importantly, thank you, Kara, for sharing your expertise and time. A video of today's Alumni Effect will be posted soon on the alumni section of our website. And a link to the website can be found in the chat. Again, it's up there earlier. Feel free to share the link with your friends and family, to others who could actually learn something about this as well too. Our next Alumni Effect speaker will be in September 2023. In the meantime, please check out our website, social media pages for more information on past Alumni Effect events and other upcoming events in the summer. And until then, take care and have a wonderful holiday to everybody. And have a good afternoon.
awesome. Happy Pride.